Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Rye Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music. It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Rye Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Rye Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune. Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly, and it's episode 184 with Shelley Read talking about her epic debut novel Go as a River, why patience as a writer is so important, and the idea that everything has its season. Before we get to the interview, a very quick catch-up from me, and Shelley's "everything has a season" comment definitely resonates with me. I've recently been refreshing my website and looking through my blog, which I was astounded to discover I've been keeping since 2009, which predates this podcast by 5 years. And I was having a flick through some of the posts, and that's been interesting. It's almost like a diary of my progress, or lack of it in many cases. But seeing me take my first tentative steps into blogging about my day, or the fact I've just found a brand new app called Twitter, and that I'm on MySpace, remember that? To then talking about the first time I took out the NaNoWriMo challenge of writing 50,000 words of a novel in a month. My writing journey's told through sporadic posts about critique groups, short story writing, podcasting. There's writing advice on there. There's stuff about music and loads of other stuff. And along the way, just as I have with this podcast, I've found myself trying to use the format to keep me honest and accountable. I've set myself deadlines for certain milestones, some of which I achieved, many of which I didn't, and I found myself cringing, to be honest, at some of the fleeting moments of confidence that I've had where I've proclaimed things like, right, that's it, I'm self-publishing my book and it'll be out in the world by next April, only then to change my mind, instinctively knowing that that particular novel wasn't ready, and in truth, that I wasn't ready. And what do I mean by that? Well, I don't just mean that my writing might not have been good enough at the time, although that's definitely a possibility, but maybe the story wasn't right, the timing wasn't right, and whilst I'm not really a mystical kind of person, maybe the universe wasn't quite lined up where it needed to be. I know from other aspects of my life, like my filmmaking career, for example, that sometimes you just have to go the long way around to meet the right people at the right time, to have the skills you need to make it. And yes, there is an element of chance with these things, but my colleague's late father used to have a saying, and I think I might even mention it in today's chat with Shelley, I'm not sure, but it's not just a case of waiting for your ship to come in, it's being ready to row out to meet it if it does come in. It's that idea that you're ready to take the opportunity when it arises. All of which is a very long way of saying what Shelley articulates much more succinctly with "everything has its season." So yes, I will continue to make outlandish statements and set myself silly deadlines on the podcast and on my blog, but I'll stop beating myself up too much when and if they don't quite pan out in the time frame I imagine. As many regular listeners will know, I've recently been fortunate enough to get to work with Lauren North as my mentor, and Lauren's enthusiasm and confidence has been infectious to the point where I'm now starting to believe things will finally start to happen for me this year. And maybe I'm not quite as confident as Lauren, but she's given me a boost that has at least allowed me to consider that something might happen soon-ish. And a big part of that is that we seem to be on the same wavelength with what I want to achieve with my book, Safe Hands, and her feedback and suggestions have really gelled with my instincts. I can see the story getting tighter and pacier and just generally having more zing than the previous drafts, and I can't wait to hear her thoughts on the rest of the manuscript, ready for my next wave of submissions to go out in May. See, there I go again, raising expectations and giving you time frames for stuff. Well, who cares? At least I'm moving forward, and isn't that all we can do as writers and creatives? And on that subject, why don't you get in touch and let me know your writing deadlines, milestones, your hopes, your dreams? And you can do that by emailing me, wayne@waynekellyWrites.com, or dropping me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free, and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up, and you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows, events, workshops, and anything else that's going on, really. Equally, I'd love to hear what you're up to, so as I say, drop me a line. Anyway, let's get to today's chat with Shelley Read. So Shelley is a fifth-generation Coloradoan who lives with a family in the Elk Mountains of the Western Slope. She was a senior lecturer at Western Colorado University for nearly 3 decades, where she taught writing, literature, environmental studies and honours, and was a founder of the Environment and Sustainability major and a support program for first-generation and at-risk students. Go as a River is her first novel. It's inspired by the landscape she comes from, and it's out on April the 13th. So enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end to wrap things up. Okay, Shelley, thanks so much for joining me on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you just start off just by telling us how things are going and give us a sense of where you're speaking from in the world?
Hi, Wayne. It's so nice to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. Uh, I am speaking to you from my place high in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, where we have well over 3 meters of snow in my yard still. So I hear spring is springing there in the UK, but certainly not for me.
Yeah, finally, just today, literally today, though, Shelley. That's about the first bit of sunshine we've had for many
Is
months.
it? Okay, good. Well, I hope it keeps coming for you.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, well, that's great. Well, it sounds like a much more exotic location than I'm in currently, so that's exciting. So I think that location is a big part of your debut book, isn't it? Or a big part of the inspiration. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Go as a River.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Go as a River is a novel, and it is set here in the Gunnison Valley on the western slope of the Colorado Rockies, where I live and where I've lived for decades. It's the story of a young woman named Victoria Nash, who's growing up along the banks of the wild Gunnison River in the lower end of the Gunnison Valley. And the novel opens in 1948 when she's 17 years old. And it follows Victoria's journey through a variety of complicated challenges and difficult decisions and losses until 1971. And in that time, as you mentioned, the setting for Victoria's story really is almost a character in and of itself for the book. Both the area where she grows up, which is the town of Iola, and then also when she flees into the wilderness. So the town of Iola is an actual town, or it was an actual town here in the Gunnison Valley before it was evacuated and flooded to create Blue Mesa Reservoir, which is the largest
Mhm.
reservoir in Colorado. So a lot of the story has to do with place and displacement, about home and family, and where we turn when those things are lost. And yes, the landscape and the place really inform so many of Victoria's circumstances.
Yeah. Well, it sounds epic, as you say. It sounds great. So, do you remember kind of what the original inspiration for the story was, where the character Victoria came from?
Yeah, and it all started with Victoria. It really did. She's a character who I've really come to love deeply over the years that I've been sitting with her and getting to know her and getting to know her story. Um, Victoria was definitely the seed for the overall novel, but I can tell you it actually began with a moment that I'll tell you just a quick story because this exact moment ended up in the novel. It's sort of 100-ish pages in where for your readers who have read the book, and I won't give away any spoilers while we're chatting
Yeah,
today,
no spoilers.
no spoilers,
Yeah.
but for those who have read the book, there's a moment when Victoria is sitting in a meadow, and a doe, a deer, comes coming into the meadow through the foliage, and Victoria sort of locks eyes with this doe. And they sort of have this beautiful moment. And then the doe goes back into the foliage and comes out with a small fawn. And then pretty soon, a second, even smaller and more fragile fawn follows out. And it's just this sort of lovely moment in the book. And that exact moment happened to me while I was out camping by myself in the
Wow.
upper end of the valley. I was just out for an evening, like I like to do. I love to camp by myself. It's a place where I can really think clearly. And that
Hmm.
exact scene unfolded right before me in a meadow one evening. And so it was so lovely. I really connected with that doe mother to mother. There was something really powerful about me worrying for her that she wasn't going to be able to keep both of those babies alive. And so I grabbed my journal, the deer moved on, of course, and I grabbed my journal and I wrote it all down. And I don't know, I had no idea why I was writing it down other than I just like to write things. And so
Yeah.
the next day is when I was thinking about that. I was actually up hiking, I was climbing a mountain, and I was thinking about that scene. And I suddenly started thinking about that scene through the lens of some other woman, someone else. And that's actually where the character of Victoria began for me. And so I knew from the very beginning that her story was going to be something around what it means to be a woman in the world. I just wasn't sure exactly where it was going to go. And so I just let it evolve over many years, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And was this your kind of first attempt at like writing a novel, or have you dallied with it in the past? Because lots of people when we have on here, although it's their debut novel, it's not always the first novel they actually wrote. In terms of like many of us, we've got lots of half finished or completed but hidden away on the hard drive or in a drawer kind of novels.
Right, right. Well, for me, it was definitely my first novel, so much so that as this character, Victoria, started forming inside of me, and I started pondering more frequently the story. I was a full-time professor at the time. I was raising my two kids, really pouring my heart and soul into both of those endeavors, and also just managing normal difficulties in life. And I really didn't have a whole lot of time to devote to writing this story. And so I would write it in
Hmm.
little snippets. Like anytime an idea would come to me, I'd jot it down on a little scrap piece of paper on a post-it note, and I would throw it into a file. And it wasn't because I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. And it really wasn't until that file got fairly thick that I thought, oh my goodness, this is a novel.
You've
I think I
you've
think
sort of
this is a
accidentally
novel.
written a
I
book.
sort of
Yeah.
accidentally wrote a novel. Isn't that funny? Historically, I had written quite a bit, but I'd written short fiction and poetry
Yeah.
and some literary nonfiction for magazines. But I never actually had even, I don't think I'd ever even imagined that I would write a novel until this one came together and really demanded to be a novel.
Yeah, that's great. So let's go back a little bit then. So tell me a little bit more about you in terms of how you came to writing in general. What's your earliest memory of writing? Is it something that you've always enjoyed?
Yes, yes. I honestly think I was born to it. I think it was one of those things that, I always loved meeting someone who was so passionate about something as a child and it kind of hung with them throughout their life. Because I think, wow, isn't that a mysterious force, just something you come in with in a way?
Hmm.
And I feel
Yeah.
that way about both writing and reading and just love of story in general. I've been writing as long as I can remember. Ever since I was a little kid, I always really thought in narrative and I jotted down things. My mom, bless her heart, has boxes of short stories and poems that I wrote when I was a little kid, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I sort of hilariously wrote a 66-page book when I was 9 years old. And I only recently was going through some of those old writings with my mom, and that little illustrated book that I did when I was in third grade was tucked in a in an envelope, and on the envelope it mentioned that it was in response to a creative writing assignment that was only supposed to be 2 pages, and I wrote 66 pages. And so,
I can relate to that.
can
Yeah.
you? Oh, I love that, because I think that's really shows that I just was so drawn to it. So I set out as an undergraduate, as a young woman, to be a writer. I majored in both creative writing and literary studies, and a second major in journalism as an undergraduate. Then I went directly
Mhm.
on to an MFA program at Temple University's graduate program in creative writing. There was no doubt that I was setting out in the world to be a writer. And yet, while I was in grad school, I was also awarded a teaching fellowship. And I really fell in love with teaching. And I felt like that was a way to affect positive change in the world, work with young people and cheer
Yeah,
them
yeah,
on and help
definitely.
them with their
Yeah.
skills. And so I'm not sure if it's so much a detour or just a phase of life, but I ended up teaching for almost 30 years. And
Yeah.
I was writing, here and there during that time, but not with as much focus, certainly, as I thought that I would be throughout my life. And it's actually astonishing how quickly 30 years can go by.
Yeah, it
um,
is. Yeah.
yeah, so I think, I came back around to it with this novel, and I'm so grateful that I did. And I'm so grateful that I listened to this character, Victoria, and to this book, that it really just was a story that insisted on being told in some strange way. And so I took early retirement from teaching at my university, and I just focused on finishing and polishing up this book and getting it out in the world. And I'm really grateful that I did.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So in terms of your path to publication, do you remember the moment where you kind of thought, I mean, obviously you would have finished your first draft and then you'd have been rewriting, as you say, and
Yeah.
polishing it and all the rest of it. Do you remember the sort of time when you thought, right, okay, enough tweaking and polishing and redrafting, it needs to go out into the world? Do you remember that moment and or that sort of time and how you felt about sending it
Yeah.
out into the world?
Yeah, I do remember that. I'm a big reviser. I have always encouraged that in my
Mhm.
students as well. And so it almost became a bit of a joke with my husband and my kids, like, oh, mom finished her book, I finished my book, and then they'd see me
Again.
working on it, and I'd be like, oh, not really. Okay, I'm tweaking it again. I'm tweaking it again. And I
Yeah.
did a lot of revisions, but I would say it was late 2017, early 2018, when I felt that I finally, literally after working on it for, here and there for well over 10 years, I thought
Hmm.
it was ready to send out to an agent. I knew that would be my first step. And so
Hmm.
I did. I felt that it was complete enough. And so gratefully, my wonderful agent, Sandra Bond from the Bond Literary Agency, really loved it. It was that process that most writers go through where you send the first 10 pages. And then if
Hmm.
the agent is interested, they say, yes, I'd love to see the whole manuscript. So I did have a whole and complete manuscript to send to Sandra. And gratefully, she loved it and took me on right away. For my publishing journey, I think of that as the one easy moment because I know I've had friends and good people who are wonderful writers, who it's taken them quite a long time to get an agent. And so for me, that process was the quick part, and nothing else about this book getting into the world was quick. So I think it all comes around exactly as it should for each one of us. We each have our story and our journey toward publication. After that time, I did a few revisions with Sandra, and then she started putting it, shopping it with major publishers. And we got a number of quote unquote rejections over a span of a couple of years. Because what I did find, and some of the your writers who are listening to the podcast might know, that big publishing houses kind of they look at books they sort of have their seasons, I guess it would be, where they will
Definitely. Yeah.
accept the queries and then they will not accept the queries for months on end, and then they
Hmm.
will be open to them again. So I didn't really know much about that process previous to being in the thick of it. But with each round, whatever passes we received, I I also received these wonderful, very encouraging letters from those editors saying all the reasons that they thought it was good and worth sticking with. And unfortunately, the final paragraph would always start with a however,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the reasons, whatever the reasons may be. Sometimes were
yeah.
very outside of my control, but it was a wonderful process. I learned so much from that process of being brave enough to put it in the world, first of all, and then allowing my agent, really trusting her to navigate the process from there. And it was in summer or early summer of 2021 where my wonderful American publishers, Spiegel and Grau, my editor Cindy Spiegel, saw something really special in the book, and she picked it up for publication, which I'm so grateful for. And so yeah, it was a bit of a long road, but I think in the end it was all perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, as you say, it takes as long as it takes, I guess.
Hmm.
For some people, obviously, it's a good job that you stuck with it, including the writing of it, because
Yeah,
as you say, it was over a long period of
it
time.
was, yes.
What, what's been your kind of favorite part of the process, would you say, and why?
Well, it was wonderful to me to get to get back to my writerly self, as we've just discussed. I think when anyone has a creative spirit inside of them and they get too distracted, or I'm not even sure what the word is, where their life is busy enough in the more practical concerns, and the creativity can often get bumped to the bottom of the list, I fear. I
Yeah,
think
definitely.
um, the very real fact that we all need to have a reliable income and raise our families and show up to our lives. I think that a lot of people end up shelving their creativity for one reason or another. And I think I did a little bit too much of that throughout my life. And so for me, the most enjoyable part of this entire journey was getting back to my writerly self and reminding myself that this is something I both loved and that I do love and that I have a talent for, and just honoring that in my life. It felt very affirming to just clear a space for that and to honor it, and also to dig in and stick with it, like you said. And then I would think the other really, really enjoyable part was getting to know this character of Victoria Nash, really digging into the themes of strength and resilience and grief and loss, and allowing me to explore through her character um, some of the themes and the concerns that I have with existence, some of the things that I've learned along the way in my own journey, being able to examine some of those things and put those things in the world through Victoria's story has really been a joy for me. And I'm just thrilled out of my mind that readers are responding to it so positively.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And what did your family, you mentioned there, obviously your family was saying, oh, mum's finished a book and all that sort of thing. When you had actually finished it and you knew that it was actually going to get out into the world and other people were going to read it, what was your family's reaction to it? What's been your family's reaction to it so far?
Oh, they've been so incredibly supportive and kind and happy for me. My husband, my two kids, my mom and dad, my brother and his wife, my cousins, my aunts and uncles. I come from this large Colorado family where
Hmm.
we all really do watch out for one another. I wrote this book rather quietly, just kind of in the background for many years. I didn't make a big deal out of it. And so
Hmm.
as they sort of one by one became aware that I was on this journey, I've got nothing but incredible support. And one of the greatest joys of this whole journey has been able to place it in my mom and dad's hands. They're well into their 80s now, and my
Hmm.
dad's health has not been great lately. And so they were always so encouraging of my writing as a child and as a young woman. And for it to all come full circle and place my novel in their hands and be able to celebrate with my family, celebrate with my kids, and show them that, when you really want to make something happen in life, I hope I've been a good example to them of having the determination to really stick with something that you believe in. So I think for my family, it's all been really exciting, and we're all really grateful as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great to hear. So tell us a little bit about your process. Have you over the period of time that you've been working on the Go as a River, did you find that you kind of refined your process over a period of time? Did you obviously you said you started off and you were just things were coming to you, you were just writing snippets.
Yeah.
But at what point did you think, you know what, I'm actually writing a book and now I'm gonna sit down and actually I'm gonna write the book and I'm gonna craft it into something?
Yeah.
How did you approach it from that point of view?
Well, I appreciate that question and the word that you use, craft, because while I was a university professor, I taught creative writing for many, many years, all sorts of different kinds of writing. And I always really enjoyed talking with the students about it as craft, very much think
Mm,
of writing as a developed skill and as a craft as much as any other art form. And so I feel like I've been developing my craft of writing little by little by little throughout my life. And
mhm,
also as by reading so much, in my literary studies, both as a undergraduate and a master's and on to my PhD work, I read. I read so deeply. So my process is very rooted in studying narrative, studying my own process, studying my own craft, being really willing to revisit it and being really willing to let go of things, even when I really love them, a particular passage or a character, someone, any aspect of the book that doesn't serve the story. I've really gotten better and better at that over time. And then, like I said, as a reader, I think that I just have developed by really studying the craft of other writers, a deep sense of
mhm,
narrative. And so a lot of it for me at this point is very intuitive. I have an intuition about a line or a word or a passage or a plot twist. If it feels right in my gut, or if it's not quite right, I'll go back to it. And so my
mhm,
process with this book was all motivated by my love of my characters, not just Victoria, but all of the characters, and really wanting to tell their story to the absolute best of my ability.
mhm.
And that's why I think why it took me so long, but also why I was so careful, I guess, with the process and am so pleased with how it all turned out in the end.
Yeah. And do you tend to find, are you a pantser, as they say, you write by the seat of your pants, or do you like to plan?
I don't know, but I love that term. I think it's hilarious. I am, what am I? I'm a sketcher, I think is what I am. I'm definitely not a
Yeah.
planner. I don't plan it out. I always have notebooks with me. I always have thoughts going on in my head. I always have a pen to jot those down. And then I go back. The stack of spiral bound notebooks and handwritten notes that I have for Go as a River, there's it's a very tall stack because
Yeah.
I sketch out ideas, I jot things down so I don't forget them. I piece things together like a puzzle. Um, I cross off massive swaths of writing or delete them and say start again, And so
Hmm.
I'm neither a pantser nor a planner, but I am a collector of ideas,
Hmm.
and I do sketch out. Maybe it'll go this way. Then I'll sit with that for a little while, and if that doesn't seem like the right direction, I'll maybe sketch out something else. Um, the the part of writing that I love the most, and you might understand this feeling, and some of your writers who are listening might understand this feeling, is when you're in your groove with the story and you're in your groove with the characters and you know them deeply enough that you almost just sort of let them take over. And that feeling
Yeah.
that you have when you're typing along and you think, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
That's the best feeling.
oh my gosh, it's the best feeling, and it's usually for me it's character driven. If the character
Hmm.
who I really am feeling like I'm in a deep place of knowing is making that decision, then I will explore it. And it's not always 100% trustworthy, but I absolutely adore that feeling. And for me, it takes a lot to get into that deep, deep place, to get to that moment of flow. I think that's the other reason it took me so long to
Hmm.
write this book is when you have family life and things going on, you might steal an hour or two here and there to write. But for me, that was never enough. It takes about an hour
Hmm.
at least for me to get
Get your
any
head in the
access.
game, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get any access to that deep place that is the knowing place inside of you that even knows how to, what kind of decisions are good or bad. And I know a lot of people have really structured writing lives where they get up every day and they write a certain number of words. I
Hmm.
love that. I wish I were that person. I encourage that in people.
Mm.
For me, it's always been a little bit more about fitting it in, and as often as I possibly can, carving out large chunks of time um, to allow the writing to kind of take over. Yeah.
And do you find that, do you have sort of rituals or things that you do? You mentioned that sort of, it might take you maybe an hour to get into that sort of flow state. Do you have things that you tend to do that can help you get there? You know, for some people it's music, or they've got a particular place that they go to, or or they might read a specific book or whatever.
Right.
Do you have anything like that, or is it just a case of you literally just need to sit in the chair and get some quiet time?
Yeah. The quiet is essential. But yeah, I actually have two things that really, really help me um, move into that deeper place. One of them is to go out into the wilderness. So,
Hmm.
as you mentioned earlier, so much of the setting for Go as a River is in wild landscapes here in the Colorado Rockies, and the reason for that is I spend a tremendous amount of time out in the wilderness. The higher in elevation and the wilder, the better for me. It's my happy place. It's my comfort zone. And it's also where I do my best thinking and my best writing. So I often head out into the wilderness with a notebook. And I don't need to be writing about the wilderness for the ideas to flow. But certainly, much of Go as a River was actually written in the exact landscapes that I'm describing. I have journals, years and years and years of journals um, from way back, just full of observations I make of the natural world. It really gets
Hmm.
um, my observational mind and my creative juices flowing to be out in wild landscapes. And the other thing that really helps me if I have some writer's block or I just need to get into the mood to write is I read poetry. I am a
Hmm.
huge fan of poetry and I've studied a lot of it in my life. And I don't read much fiction when I'm trying to write because I don't want to get my story mixed up with anyone else's, but I read a lot
Hmm.
of poetry. It just inspires me to attend carefully to the written word, and it inspires me how sometimes just the exact right word choices can evoke a feeling or a mood or an image. So poetry of a wide variety really inspires my writing.
Yeah, that's great. And as you say, it's brilliant having that literally on your doorstep, that amazing location and background to kind of immerse yourself into, to sort of get into that headspace.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really grateful for it. I live at 9,000 feet. I'm not sure how many meters that is, but it's very high into
It's high, yeah.
into the Rocky Mountains. And that wilderness connection for me is really just so essential. And I think it's probably one of the things that readers are responding to with my novel. I think that maybe that we all, on some really, really fundamental level, um, have a connection with the natural world,
Hmm.
and maybe don't have the opportunities to cultivate that as closely as many of us would love to do, if we're living in an urban setting or, um, you know, or just lack of time in our daily lives. But I always encourage people, and I hope my novel encourages people also, to just get a little bit of wildness in your life every day, even if it just means a park down the street or your own backyard and watch the birds. I find it incredibly instructive. I find it very humbling. And I find that it is something so essential to human existence that many people don't necessarily make space for in their lives.
I totally agree. Yeah. If you could go back and start again tomorrow, with your career or whatever? Or is there anything that you would tell your younger self? Is there anything that you do differently, do you think?
Oh, wow. What a question that is. I don't know. Um, I've become a big believer that in life everything has its season,
Hmm.
and when you live in a wild landscape the way that I do here in the Colorado Rockies, we all live very much by the seasons, more so than I think a lot of other places. And so seasonality is just a deep part of my life. And when I pull the lens back on that and think more broadly to the entire span of my life, I like to look back at certain eras of my life as well. That was the season for that, and then I moved on
Yeah.
to something new. And certainly teaching was a very meaningful endeavor for me. Raising my kids was probably the most meaningful and most amazing thing I will ever do. They're young adults now. And
Yeah.
um, and so I think my answer to your question is no. I think I wouldn't really do anything differently. I've lived a beautiful, beautiful life. I've climbed many, many mountains, I guess both literally and metaphorically,
Yeah.
faced a
Yeah.
lot of challenge, a lot of loss and grief and challenge in my life, and have always been able to step up and step forward and find a way to gather myself and move on. And I think all of that contributed to the the quality of my writing at this moment in my life. And so I think probably I would say I wouldn't change a thing, and
Yeah.
that
Well,
it's
that's
it's all
great.
perfect. Yeah. And I would
Yeah.
encourage other writers to think of their journey as such also. I think creativity has its own timeline. I think our lives evolve as they should, as long as we show up. We show up every day. We give it our best. We show up with integrity and good intentions. I think our lives will evolve as they will. And I know so many writers who are frustrated with their writing process in one way or another. And I think maybe I've learned with my own journey that it all comes around just as it should if you keep showing up to it.
Yeah. That's a great way of looking at it. So as we kind of move towards wrapping things up, what do you think has been the best piece of creative advice that you've been given along the way? And that along the way, and that might be writing related. It might not. It might just be general creativity or something. Piece of advice that somebody's given you along the way that's kind of that sticks out or kind of you remember.
Yeah, well, I think my family that I mentioned earlier, my mom and dad taught me very young to believe in myself. And I've always tried to pass that on to my children and on to my students and to any writers that I end up working with in workshops and whatnot. It might sound sort of corny, but I think there's nothing more important than just having a bedrock sense of self and a bedrock sense of that this is your one precious life and that you have every right to live it exactly as you see fit, and that your choices and how you step into the world and what you honor and what you love is really up to you. And I was lucky enough to be encouraged with that viewpoint my entire life. And I think that it has made all the difference in the world for me in everything that I've done. But I think particularly as a writer, because I have never really let discouragement or worry get the best of me. I've always had a certain
Hmm.
sense of faith in my ability to tell a good story and to put something out in the world. And I think just that level of confidence and belief in myself and my own abilities um, is what I most value. Yeah. So I would encourage other writers to try to find that place deep inside of themselves. I do not pretend that that is easy. That is not an easy thing to do. But I think that is hands down the best advice that I have been given in my life and that I could share with others.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. So as we kind of wrap things up now, why don't you can you give us a sense of maybe what a sense of what's coming next? You might not be able to tell us exactly because obviously Go as a River is only just coming out, but
Yeah.
are you working on another book? Have you got something else in the pipeline?
Yeah, yeah. So on this whole publishing journey for Go as a River, I will mention that my next most exciting step is the publication there in the UK. I'm so
Yeah.
excited about it, and I have such an amazing team there, and just so grateful with how well the book has been received, and I'm just thrilled that my publication date is coming up soon in the UK. And for me, yes, I am working on another novel. I'm very immersed currently with everything to do with getting Go as a River in the world and helping to get it into readers' hands. So I can't say that I'm writing all that much. However, I do have a second novel in the works, and it also will be set in Colorado, although in a very different part of Colorado. I believe so far what I know about it is that it will also be driven very much by character and by place. And I what I'm doing currently is trying to get to know these new characters, because I found the most valuable thing to me about writing Go as a River was how deeply I knew every single character in that book. So my strategy is to really get going on this next bit is to learn these new characters and figure out what story they want me to tell.
And have obviously you'll have fun while you're doing it. So can you give people a sense of, maybe just tell people where they can find out more about you online? And I think I'm right in saying that the book comes out here April 13th. Is that right?
Yes, April 13th in the UK with Doubleday UK and my remarkable team there, April 13th. And I'll actually be in the UK. I'll be in the UK the first week of May. I'm not sure exactly what all my wonderful publicist, Alison Barrow, has cooked up for me, but I know it'll be fabulous. And so I'm really looking forward to my time there with all of you. And I do have a website. It's shelleyread.com. And also I joined the world of social media around the publication of this book. And I'm really enjoying it actually on Instagram with a wonderful community of readers and book lovers, the Bookstagram world. And I'm at shelleyread.author on Instagram, so you can find me there.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joineduprighting.co.uk. But for the time being, Shelley, thanks very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you.
Wonderful. And thank you for these wonderful questions about writing. You've really made me think more deeply about a whole lot of things. So thank you for your great question. Joined Up Writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Shelley, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes over at joineduprighting.co.uk. That's it for this week, other than me reminding you to make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts, and that way you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every time. You won't miss a thing. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts because it helps others to find the show, or recommend it to 1 or 2 or 10 of your friends. So that's it for this week, but thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.